They go into solution, but you can still, by chemical process, separate them from that solution. Let me give you an example. If you put a spoon of salt, table salt, in water, right, and you shake it up, it disappears, right? But if you put that water that is now an aqueous solution of that salt on the stove, and you evaporate the water, what is left in the pot? The salt. That is what makes it an aqueous solution. That cannot happen with every mineral. For instance, milk. If you boil milk, it evaporates completely. There's nothing left at the bottom of the pot. Only stains, right? Okay. So, electrolytes are these natural solid inorganic substances. They're basically charged minerals. They carry either positive charges or negative charges. When they are positive, we call them cations. When they are negative, we call them anions. Okay, and I'm giving you some examples, right? The reason it is important to talk about electrolytes is because electrolytes determine the movement and distribution of water between the intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid. Okay? Crystalloids are the aqueous solutions of electrolytes. Okay? Crystalloids is the solution electrolytes form when they are in water. They are different from colloids. You see milk, you mix milk and water, you will never be able to separate them because milk and water form what is called a colloid mixture, whereas salt in water forms a crystalloid solution. Right? I remember when we're talking about shock, we talk about crystalloids. That's what you give. Crystalloids like normal saline, lactate, Ringer's lactate, and all those types of crystalloid solutions that we use in shock, right? Okay. Now, in order for you to understand the way this really works, you have to remember osmosis. You all remember osmosis, right? So, osmosis. I
said yes.
Okay. Osmosis is the movement of water molecules from a region of higher to lower concentration. If you stop there, you've not come. That is not osmosis. If you stop right here, that is diffusion. What makes osmosis different from diffusion is that osmosis occurs through a semi-permeable membrane. Okay? So, what is a semi-permeable membrane? A semi-permeable membrane is a membrane that exhibits differential permeability. It's a membrane. Membranes have pores. If the membrane selects what goes through and what doesn't, in other words, the membrane exhibits differential permeability, it is called a semi-permeable membrane, okay? Pervious to permeable solids and water and impervious to non-permeable solids. Now, so if you take two solutions and you separate them by a semi-permeable membrane, water will move from region of high concentration to region of low concentration, okay, through that semi-permeable membrane. The pressure, in order for you to gauge the strength of the pull of water from that region of high concentration to the region of low concentration, because that is happening, movement occurs by force. There is always force. Whenever there is movement, a force is applied. Because remember the Newton law of motion, right? Everything continues in a state of rest or constant motion unless acted upon by an impressed force. Remember that law, right?
Yes.
Okay. So for water to move like this, there must be a force pulling it. In osmosis, that force is what we call osmotic pressure. Okay? Is the external pressure required to prevent the movement of water across the membrane by osmosis. And you will understand that that pressure is a direct measure of the concentration of the solid over here. Right? If water is going to move from a less salty liquid to a more salty liquid, the rate of water diffusion or movement determined by the amount of salt over here. If there is just little difference between them, water will move very slowly. If there is a lot of difference between them, water will move very fast. Have you seen a red cell in seawater before? You've seen it? You need to watch a video of red cell in water. Is boom. It just shrinks and you put it in fresh water, it explodes right there in the water. You put it in seawater, it shrivels like a piece of paper. That is osmotic pressure in motion, right? Now, osmotic pressure has a unit called osmol, okay? And an osmol is equivalent to the amount of solute that yields 1 mole of osmotically active particles in an aqueous solution. That is a definition you just need to be familiar with. You don't need to memorize it. Okay, you know elements, metals have a mole, Avogadro number. Remember that? Exactly. So osmol is just a unit of measure for osmotic pressure, right? Again, I'm trying to make sure you understand the difference between osmosis and diffusion. They are both examples of passive transportation, right, in the body, and they are both means of equalizing concentrations of the concentration of two solutions separated by a semi-permeable membrane. But they do have some unique differences. Osmosis has to go through a semi-permeable membrane, whereas diffusion, there is no barrier. Okay? Now, what then is osmolarity? Osmolarity then is from osmosis, right? So otherwise known as osmotic concentration. Osmolarity is the combined osmotic strength of the solute in solution. So if you have an aqueous solution of sodium chloride, every sodium atom there is pulling its own water. Every chloride atom there is pulling its own water. The combined osmotic pool of all the sodium and chloride ion in that aqueous solution is what is called osmolarity. It's basically the concentration of the salt in the solution. You got that, right? Right?
Yeah.
Excellent. So, what is important is for you to know that osmolarity measures the osmoles, not the moles. There's a difference between osmoles and moles, right? Osmolarity, and the difference is as simple as this. See, for instance, 2 moles of sodium chloride gives you how many osmoles? 4. Because every mole of sodium chloride dissociates into 1 sodium, 1 chloride. So you get 4 osmoles for 2 osmoles of sodium chloride. But how many osmoles do you get for 2 moles of glucose? 2. Because glucose does not dissociate into osmoles, right? So it is the total number of osmoles per liter of the solution. It is determined by the number of particles into which the solute dissociates in solution. And I give you an example. A 3 osmole solution can be 1 mole of glucose and 1 mole of sodium chloride, because glucose will give you 1, sodium chloride will give you 2, right? It could be 1.5 moles of sodium chloride, because for every mole of sodium chloride you get 2 osmoles, right? It could be 1 mole of magnesium chloride, because for every magnesium chloride molecule you get 1 magnesium and 2 chlorides, right? So now you understand clearly the difference between moles and osmoles. Good. That is so important. So now you know osmolarity, you know it's based on osmoles. But then there is this other term you will hear, osmolality. We talked about this in endocrine osmosis lecture, right? They are the same thing. They measure concentration of solution. The only difference is osmolarity measures it per liter of solution, whereas osmolality measures it per kg of solution. And since we're talking about human body, the solution we're referring to is always water. And since the density of water is 1, the mass of water is always equal to the volume of water. So in terms of value, the magnitude does not change whether you use osmolarity or osmolality. As far as human body is concerned, Osmolality is always the same thing as osmolarity. Okay? And you must know how to calculate it by heart. So this is the formula for calculating osmolarity, right? It's sodium plus the anion. So we always multiply sodium by 2 because we know sodium never travels alone. So sodium, whatever sodium is, times 2, plus glucose, whatever the serum glucose is. 18 is the molecular weight of glucose. And whatever urea is, divide by 2.8, okay, which is the molecular weight of urea, blood, urea, nitrogen. So, and then you add it all together. The reason the normal serum osmolality is 290 is because normal serum glucose is about 90, and normal serum sodium is about 140, and normal blood urea is about 15. Okay, that is why the normal serum osmolality is on the average 290. Okay? So now you know what osmosis is, right? You always knew that. You now know what osmolarity is, right? You know what osmolality is. Now let's talk about tonicity, because they are connected terms. Osmolarity and tonicity. The tonicity of a solution is the osmolarity of the impermeable solid particle in the solution. So say for instance, I have a bag of honey, and honey is complex carbohydrate, right? It can't really diffuse. But that bag of honey, if I dip it in anything, it will take water from whatever it is, right? Because the honey cannot leave the membrane, it always pulls water in it. So what is tonicity? Tonicity, therefore, is the osmolality of the impermeable solid particles in that solution. So if I have honey in a semi-permeable bag, the honey cannot leave. So that bag would always draw water into whatever solution I put it in, except I put it in another bag of honey. You can't draw water from, because the osmolality will balance on either side. So you have your own tonicity. Every organism, amoeba, any protozoan, have their own tonicity. They have things that will not leave their body, right? A cell, for instance, has nucleoprotein enzymes contained by a cell membrane. Those things don't just leave and go and come back in. The cell is an intact organism, right? All of those will determine the tonicity of that organism. So if I take, for instance, let me give you an example. If I take a bacterium and I put a bacterium in fresh water, what will happen? We'll take in water, right? Because there are protein molecules in the cytoplasm that may not be able to leave the bacterium, right? And they will exert a pull on the water in the fresh water. So the bacterium will take on water. And if that bacterium is not able to expel the water as fast as it's coming in, what will happen? It will burst, just like a red cell will. The force that bacterium uses to draw water into itself, that is based on its osmolarity, is what is called tonicity. Okay? And that tonicity exists because there are solutes within the bacterium that cannot leave. And because they stay, they always pull water in. Right? So tonicity is actually the osmolarity of the impermeable solid, the particles that cannot leave the solution. Permeable solids do not exert significant osmotic pressure. You can understand that. The reason that the bacterium will take on water is because the cytoplasmic protein cannot leave and establish equilibrium across the membrane. If the cytoplasmic protein can leave the bacterium into the environment, then they will compete for the water with the protein inside and outside of the cell, right? So at the end of the day, there will be balance, and the cell, the bacterium, will survive. But because the protein cannot leave the cell, they stay within the cell and attract water into the cell. So generally speaking, tonicity is exerted by the impermeable solid. The permeable solids do not exert significant osmotic pressure. It is tonicity that determines the effective osmotic pressure of the solution. It is tonicity that sets the tone for the movement of water through the membrane. If you put cells in hypotonic solutions, they take in water and they burst. You put cells in hypertonic solution, like here, they lose water and they shrink and shrivel. If you put cells in isotonic solution, they maintain balance. And that is why IV fluids that we use for therapy are classified as isotonic, hypertonic, or isotonic, right? We call it normal saline because it's exactly the same tonicity as serum. So the cells of the body don't gain water because you give somebody normal saline. Okay? So now you understand where tonicity comes from. And you understand its relationship with osmolarity and osmolality, right? Good?
Yes.
Excellent. Good. Moving on now. So you know that, we talked about this before, that all of the water in your body, 2/3 are inside the cells and 1/3 outside the cell, right? Of the ones outside the cell, 2/3 are outside of the blood vessels, 1/3 inside of the blood vessels. The reason water is distributed like that in the body is because of the sodium and potassium distribution in the body. Body water moves freely between the intra and extracellular space in response to solute concentration. The amount of water in any space depends on the solute concentration in it. So potassium is the main intracellular solute, and sodium is the main solute in the extracellular space. But what is interesting is that sodium is the solute that maintains 1/3 of the total body water outside of the cell. You would have expected that, well then potassium the next sentence should have been, potassium is the reason 2/3 of the body water is inside the cells. Unfortunately, that is not the case, really. And the reason that is not the case is because potassium has so many pumps in the membrane that takes it out, in and out, depending on what is going on. Depolarization pushes it out. Calcium transport pushes it out. Muscle contraction pushes it out. So there is a lot of potassium fluxes across the membrane that makes potassium ineffective as a solute to keep fluid, body water inside the cell. So it turns out that it is still sodium that modulates 2/3 of the total body water inside the cells. So if you give somebody no sodium and they lose sodium in their extracellular space, their body cells will gain water. If you give somebody a lot of salt, like give somebody hypertonic solution, their cells will lose water to the outside because of the hypertonic solution. So potassium, even though is the main intracellular solute, it exhibits no influence at all on the distribution of body water. You got that? Excellent. How then does the body regulate its water? You've seen this before, right? You remember this, right? So you remember how when extracellular volume increases, how blood volume increases, how the natriuretic peptide is released, and how it goes to stop aldosterone, stop ADH, decrease thirst. From decreased thirst, less water intake. I have 15 minutes, right? Okay, I'll catch up with you. Yeah. Just text me once you're out there. I will run out. Yeah. So you decrease thirst, then decrease water intake, right? And then you restore homeostasis. You decrease ADH, what happens? You increase water loss, right? You turn off aldo, you lose salt. The point is to try to restore volume down to normal, right? And then what happens when you're now getting you're losing volume? Again, blood pressure drops. You compromise the renal perfusion. From that, you turn on renin-angiotensin system and ADH, right, through the osmoreceptors in major lanes and arteries, right? What happens? You turn on ADH, you turn on aldo. What does ADH do? You begin to retain water. Aldo, you begin to retain salt, and then you restore the ECF back normal. Right? So this is how that happens. Now let's talk about plasma sodium concentration. So this is, I gave you all that background information to talk about plasma sodium concentration. Because plasma sodium concentration does not even, you will not even understand the physiological significance of it unless you know everything we just talked about. All right, so what happens? We send blood sample to the lab and we tell them we want to know what the sodium content is. Well, invariably what we send to the lab is serum or plasma, right? Under normal circumstances, plasma is not just water, right? Plasma is water and protein and lipids, right? Where is sodium in plasma? In plasma, is it in plasma water and proteins, or is it just in plasma water? Where is sodium? Thank you. Sodium is only in plasma water. Sodium does not dissolve in protein, right? If you put salt in your egg, you have to stir it. The salt does not disappear in the egg as it dissolves in your tea. You can see the salt when you put it in your egg white because it won't mix with it. So in plasma, there is water and there is protein, and sodium is only in the plasma water. But when the lab reports sodium concentration, they give you sodium concentration based on plasma volume, not plasma water. Right? And you can get away with that for as long as the protein and lipids are low. They will only 7% if they are normal. But if they increase, you will see, and the lab keeps reporting sodium concentration per liter of plasma instead of per liter of plasma water, you will see that the number will keep decreasing. Right? The number they will give you as serum sodium will keep decreasing as plasma lipids and protein increase because you're getting less space for plasma water. You understand that? It's like, imagine if university administration report the amount of space available to us as the combined size of this room and the next room. They will be attributing more space than we really have, right? Because we don't have access to that, right? We don't have access to that place. So our density, as the number of the unit area we each occupy, will be large compared to what it really is, because they are counting a room we don't have access to, right? That's exactly what the lab does. It measures sodium in water, but reports it as plasma volume, right? Now think about it. Supposing if that door, instead of being back there, is now half here, and we are all squished into half this space. You see how it will look like we are losing space, but we never had the space because we never had access to this other back room. So that is exactly what happens. When you have increased protein and lipids, and you send the sample to the lab, they give you a sodium that will be less than what the patient's true sodium is, right? In all of this, if you were to measure serum sodium in water, it will always be 154, regardless. That is why, if you look in the back of normal saline, the concentration of sodium is 154, because normal saline is water. It doesn't have protein there. So the sodium concentration in normal saline is 154 milliequivalent per liter, right? But the normal serum sodium in the body is 140 because of plasma and lipids. When they are normal, it's 140. But say somebody now has hyperlipidemia, like they have hyperlipidemia in the thousands. When you now measure their serum sodium, it will be less than 140. But if you have a way of measuring serum sodium only in serum water, you'll find that it's normal. That false low serum sodium that you get from the lab in patients with increased protein and lipids is what we call pseudo-hyponatremia. Okay? So whenever you see low serum sodium, don't say anything about it unless you know that the lipids and the proteins are normal. Because if they are not normal, they could be responsible for the low number you're looking at. Okay? And the patient is fine. Because the serum sodium in water is normal. It's only low because of the increase in serum protein and lipids. Is that bad? Excellent. So, hyponatremia and low serum sodium can be false, it can be true. When it is true, it is usually due to two things: too much water or too little sodium. Water excess or sodium deficit. How can you get water excess? You can get water excess by shifting water from inside the cell to outside of the cell, by increasing the intake of water, or by peeing too much. So these are the three ways in which you can get excess water. What causes water to shift from inside the cell to outside of the cell if the serum glucose is too high? Just by sheer tonicity. Hyperglycemia will pull water from the cells. And if you give somebody 3% sodium chloride, that is hypertonic solution, right? So if you give somebody hypertonic fluid infusion, you can actually pull water from their cells. Who drinks too much water? People that are thirsty all the time, like Sjogren's disease. They have dry eyes, dry mouth, dry everything, right? They drink water. Elderly patients, because the thirst center is old and not as sensitive as it could be, they're thirsty all the time. So people that drink too much water, primary polydipsia, Sjogren's, amyloidosis, and some drugs, anticholinergics, that make your mouth dry all the time. So they make you drink a lot of water, right? So again, how else can you get water excess? Reduce water output. So you pee less. Who pees less? Oliguric ATN. You talked about that earlier, right? Acute tubular necrosis. You know what ATN is, right? Good. High ADH, of course, syndrome of inappropriate ADH will make you pee less because it keeps reabsorbing all the water. Low solid, because you don't have enough solid to couple with the water. You will retain it, right? And that is what happens in a condition called beer potomania. Have you heard it before? Beer potomania? No. Okay, you see it in people that drink beer a lot. Beer potomania. Basically meaning beer drinking craze, right? So when people drink beer, they are consuming a lot of water and they're not eating. Right? Well, beer is a lot of water, right? It's what? How many percent in a can of beer? Like what? 30% alcohol, right? You don't drink beer. That doesn't mean you shouldn't know what beer. Okay, it's about 10-20% or so, right? In beer, the alcohol content. 5%, exactly. So think about it. It's 5 grams of alcohol in 100 cc. So for 5 grams of alcohol, you have to consume 100 cc of liquid. So people that drink and don't eat, they take in a lot of water and there is not enough solid. So, and you cannot pee unless there is some amount of solid to hold the water against the body cells, right? So they end up diluting their own serum and they can go cuckoo because that is basically delirium from hyponatremia, right? So that is what beer potomania is this delirium that you get from too much drinking of beer without eating. When it goes on for days, you dilute your own serum because you're not going to pee because you don't have enough solids to pee with the urine. So you hold on to the water, you dilute your serum sodium drops. Your neurons start firing crazy, and then you just start acting weird, right? Okay, so that's that. Then high ADH, you all know about ADH can come appropriate or inappropriate. Appropriate ADH is the one you get from volume depletion. How do you get volume depletion? From fluid loss. It could be overt. That means you can see it, as in vomiting, diarrhea, NG aspiration, you see it. Or it could be covert. In other words, patient is losing fluid, but it's not obvious, as in small bowel obstruction. Right, when you have multiple air fluid levels, right? All this water is trapped in the bowel, you're not seeing it, but the patient is losing water into their own gut. And they're not vomiting it, and they're not peeing it, pooping it. So you don't see it, so it's covered. And then there is third space, that is edema. Third space, when we say somebody is third spacing, that means they're losing fluid into the extravascular interstitial space. Okay? And then you all know about SIADH already. And then you have sodium deficit. How do you get sodium deficit? Reduce intake or increase output. Right? Reduce intake or increase output. Now, one thing I want you to remember is that your serum sodium does not change as a result of changes in intake or output of sodium. Okay, so reduced intake will lower body sodium content, but it will not alter plasma sodium concentration. Okay? So reduced intake does not lower your serum sodium. So nobody gets serum sodium, low serum sodium because they're not eating salt. It doesn't happen. The body does not allow that to happen. But you can get low serum sodium because you're wasting it. You have all these salt wasting nephropathy, right? Where the kidneys will not reclaim the sodium, either because it's diseased or it's resistant to aldo, right? So I told you, increased sodium output can come from hypoaldo and renal tubular damage. All right? Now, you must do two things. I told you one already. This is the second one. Before you make any comments on anybody with low serum sodium, you must check the lipids and the protein. Now, one thing you must also check is glucose. Because when glucose is high, serum sodium also drops. So you always have to correct serum sodium for glucose. And the way you do it is this complex formula. But what I tell you is add 1.6 to the serum sodium for every 100 milligram increase in serum glucose above 100. So if somebody's serum glucose is 200 and their sodium is 130, the corrected serum sodium will be 131.6. If somebody's serum glucose is 300 and their serum sodium is 140, their corrected serum sodium will be 142.8. Right? It's 1.6 for every 100 milligrams above 100 in glucose. Okay? How does hyponatremia present? Intravascular volume depletion. That is how it presents. Right? And intravascular volume depletion can be hypovolemic or hypervolemic. In other words, you could have a lot of water in your body and not have enough inside your blood vessels. Just like Bob Marley said, in the abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. It's possible. Let me give you an example. Yeah. Yeah, Holly, 5 minutes, I'll be out. Right. So, you can have a lot of water in your body and yet, this is interesting, right? You can have a lot of water in your body and not have enough inside your blood vessels. So you have hypovolemia. And you can be vomiting, and you look dry, both in your body and inside your blood vessel. We call that hypovolemia. So when we talk about volume depletion, We talk about volume depletion within the blood vessels. Right? So just because somebody is edematous and they're sipping water does not mean they have enough water in their blood vessels. Right? You could be hypovolemic and yet be intravascularly depleted. You could be hypovolemic, yes, and you'll be expected to be intravascularly depleted. And I'm giving you the causes of all of this over here. Right? And this is how you will present. Whenever you're depleted within your blood vessels, you have narrow pulse pressure, you get orthostatic changes, you get low blood pressure, and you get resting tachycardia. So how do you evaluate it? Once you see low serum sodium, the first thing you want to determine is serum osmolality. If serum osmolality is high, you know that is hyperosmotic hyponatremia. You're looking for glucose, hypertonic infusion. If lipids are high, you know that is pseudo, right? If osmolality is low, you have a problem, then you go down. You look at the patient. Is my patient hypovolemic, hypervolemic, or euvolemic? If your patient is hypovolemic, then you say your patient is hypovolemic, hypoosmotic, hyponatremia. What do you want to do next? You check urine sodium. If urine sodium is low, that means the patient is losing volume and they're turning on aldo, and aldo is reclaiming all the sodium it can in the urine, so urine sodium will be low. If urine sodium is high, that means it is the kidneys that are responsible for the problem. They are dumping all the salt in the urine, and that's why your patient is hyponatremic. So urine sodium will be more than 20 in that case. And this is how you will treat that. Supposing you look at your patient, and again your patient hyponatremic and low osmolar, but they are edematous and they're swollen, again you now have to decide, is the patient depleted in their vessels, within the blood vessel, in which case your urine sodium again will be low, and that will be like cirrhosis, heart failure, and renal failure. Or is your patient swollen and wasting sodium at the same time, and urine sodium will be high, and you will treat that with water restriction. Now, if your patient is hyponatremic and they are not volume depleted, they are not hypovolemic and they're not hypervolemic, they look normal, but urine sodium is low, then you check urine, and serum sodium is low. Again, you check urine sodium. If urine sodium is low, that means your patient is drinking too much water. Okay? If urine sodium is high, that is where your syndrome of ADH, adrenal insufficiency, will be done. And this is how you treat that. Now, I know I've rushed this information. You're going to have time to review it, okay? But are you able to follow me so far? Mm-hmm. Excellent. So this is where you now do these questions. And this is where I hand over to Justin right here. So what I want to do is, as a group, just look at the question. All of you agree on what the answer is. I'll be right back. Thank you.
All right. Everybody.
So the question is, what is the most likely type of hyponatremia in this 35-year-old female alcoholic with a history of liver cirrhosis seen in the emergency room for severe anasaka? You remember what anasaka is, right?
It's like
massive peripheral edema.
Yeah.
Right? So, and this is the profile. So this person has hyponatremia. If you were to compute the serum osmolality, just because the serum is low, it will be low. Right? So this is hypoosmolar hyponatremia. He said the patient has anasaka. So the patient has hypervolemia. So it's hypoosmotic, hypovolemic, hypoosmotic, hypervolemic hyponatremia. Right? Hypoosmotic because serum is low. Hypovolemic because she's edematous and she's hyponatremic. The reason it can't be anything else is because the VU and creatinine, as you can see, well, actually, no, it cannot be anything else because the glucose is not like super high.
Yeah.
So that's that one. And this one, you got this? You thought it was A? The reason I know why you did it. You now realize that she's on afterload reduction and decongestion. that means she's getting Lasix. So if when she came in, yes, this would be what she will be. Because she will be depleted. Heart failure, she would have turned on Aldo, and she will be reclaiming all the sodium in the urine. But because when she will be admitted, she will be on Lasix because of the decongestion. Of course, urine sodium will be high. Because remember, you know how Lasix works, right? It blocks sodium reabsorption in the thick segment of the ascending lymph node, right? Yeah. You got that now? Okay. How about this one? You got this?
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent. Are we cool? Is the whole class with us? All right. How about this one?
Yeah.
Okay. How about this one?
Yeah. Totally.
You want me to go through this?
Yeah.
Or you want me to go through this?
No.
We'll go through this.
Yeah.
So here is somebody, hyponatremic, 60-year-old female, diabetic, admitted 3 days ago for respiratory failure, secondary to severe pneumonia. Patient is Latin oriented with normal vital signs. So vital signs are normal. So if vital signs are normal, that means she's not hypovolemic. Right? Okay. She's febrile. And then if you look over here, it cannot be volume depletion. You know why? Because BU and creatinine, did they teach you in the renal failure, BU and creatinine ratio less than 10 tells you the patient is not volume depleted. Right? And if you look, this is less than 10, so it cannot be volume depletion. Now, and moreover, if it was volume depletion, urine sodium would be less than 20. So this person has a big volume. They are not volume depleted at all from that. And then syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. Yes, because everything is diluted and they're dumping sodium in urine. That is consistent with syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion, because in syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion, you have volume expansion, you turn off aldo, right? And then you dump sodium in urine, right? Primary polydipsia, well, the patient is not drinking, let me tell you that, right? Excessive insensible water loss, that would have been much higher. None of the above was causing syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion, right? Excellent. How about this one? Hyperlipidemia reduces serum sodium concentration because you moved it up. You reports it as volume of plasma, not plasma water. It reduces sodium content because it shrinks the compartment, right? And it reduces serum water because the non-aqueous portion expands. So it's all of it. How about this one? Did you guys get this one?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And this one?
Yeah.
Okay. And this one? Post-obstructive state. Okay. What else is this one? You got this?
Yeah.
Right? You've been in SIDH. Okay.
Yeah.
And this one? Did you match it? Ah, you did.
We tried.
We tried, but we struggled.
Okay, you struggled. Okay. Let's take it one at a time. So pseudo means is the false kind.
Yeah, so reassurance.
So what you erase the patient, right? Hyperosmotic hyponatremia. The hyperosmotic hyponatremia is the type you will get with hyperglycemia or saline, hypersaline infusion, right? So what would you do? What would you do? You wait.
Yeah, what's that?
You wait for the glucose to be taken care of, and or whatever the hyperosmolar substance in the blood will wash off, right? Now, hypovolemic hyposmolar hyponatremia, you keep them selling because they're hypovolemic. You replace the volume, right? Then symptomatic euvolemic hyposmolar hyponatremia is what you use. What do you do? Forced diuresis. That's what you do with SI88, right? And then hypovolemic, your fluid is free. You got it, right? You did a good job. All right. Okay, so let me recalibrate. We're supposed to go from 9 to 12, right? But we lost that middle hour. You guys don't have anything until when? Until 1. So is it okay? Tell me if it's okay. To stop at 12:15, 12:30? Then you have 30 minutes for lunch and go to the next class, or you want me to stop at 12?
What if you stop at 12? How are you going to recover?
My next lecture, acid-base disturbance, is not a whole lot. We'll cover it for sure.
Are you still going to have time to review the first two stuff with us?
To reduce the...
Review the lectures with us if you teach us the rest of this.
Actually, good point. My next lecture will begin at 8. The reason I didn't start this lecture at 8 is because you guys are here till 8 p.m. I didn't want to bring you here so the clock can stay till 8. Next, this is your last lecture for that supplemental lecture. So next Wednesday, you're free, at least in the evening. So we'll go from 8 to 12. So I'll be able to finish the remaining lecture, do some review. And I'm looking at the final. And as much as possible, I will weight the finals towards the last lectures. So you don't have to worry. I'll review the essential things for you. But most of your exams from the finals will include topics from the previous lecture that I would have reviewed with you. And then most of it will be from my own series of lectures. Okay, man?
Yeah.
Good. So let's talk about hypernatremia. Or did you go about it already?
No.
You tell us a little bit.
All right. So, I mean, if you remember the template of hyponatremia, we're going to do the same template, just switch the content, right? So, high serum sodium is either due to water deficit or sodium excess. Those are the only two basic pathophysiologic processes. How do you end up with water deficit? Well, if water shifts from the extracellular space into the cell, you lose water into the cell. When does that happen? That happens in lactic acid if you go into anaerobic metabolism, right? So like when you exercise intensely, not only are you sweating, losing water from your skin to the outside, you're also accumulating lactic acid. And lactic acid is an osmotically active substance. It's going to pull water, right, into the cells, right? So you can get intracellular shift from lactic acid, from chills, seizures, and excites. Or you reduce intake. That's what happens to the elderly. The thirst center becomes insensitive, so they don't drink as much as they should, right? So you get hypodipsia. In the other one, you talk about polydipsia, right? Where you drink too much. But now it's hypodipsia that causes. Then increased output. That could come from increased insensible loss. Like if you go to New York and you start jogging now, you're likely to experience this one. Because there's scenery in that place right now. Okay, so diaphoresis is excessive sweating, you know that, right? Okay, and febrile respiratory illness. When you have fever or any respiratory illness that gives you fever, you lose more water with your breath. Because with every breath you lose water, you know that, right? That's why if you do like this on your lungs, there is mist because water came out. So anytime you have respiratory illness and it's febrile, you lose a lot more water like that. Okay. And again, you have the GI loss, malabsorptive osmotic diarrhea, and laxative abuse. This is diarrhea that is mostly water. Okay? That's why it's the malabsorptive kind. For instance, if you don't absorb glucose, what happens? All the glucose gets to the colon and they pull water out and they come out in diarrhea. If they abuse osmotic laxatives, what do? They bring water into the colon. So you don't really lose sodium, you lose a lot more water. That is why that is the case. And then you have the renal loss, the polyuric anemia. You know, acute renal failure proceeds in 3 stages, right? You have the pre-renal, renal, and the post-renal, and then the ATN has the oliguric and polyuric phases, right? In the polyuric phase, the kidneys just go crazy, just like wide open tap. Urine just goes without any modification. So it's filtered, instead of getting absorbed because the tubule is necrosed or ischemic or dysfunctional, everything just goes right out, right? And you lose a lot of water. How do you end up with sodium excess can come from increased intake or reduced output. Increased intake does not alter plasma sodium concentration, but it will alter body sodium content. Your serum sodium will not go up because you ate 10 bags of chips, but your sodium content, the amount of salt in your body, will be increased. You understand that? Okay. And then IV fluids, very important. IV fluids and K-Exolate. You know, remember K-Exolate? We use it to treat hyperkalemia, and it's okay. And then reduced output. Reduced output comes from hyperaldosteronism. And you remember, hyperaldosteronism can be primary or secondary, right? And then remember Liddle syndrome? We talk about Liddle syndrome. It's a gain of function mutation in the kidney tubules that makes the kidney tubules crazy about sodium. They just hold on to sodium. Even in the absence of aldo, the tubules, they hold on to sodium. Patient is hypertensive and the tubules are still holding on to sodium. Aldosterone is suppressed and the kidneys are still holding on to sodium. That is what Liddle syndrome is. It's a gain of function mutation of the renal tubules that predisposes the tubules to holding on to sodium. They just keep reabsorbing sodium. Okay, so that is how you can get reduced output of sodium excess. Now, there is something I want you to understand, because I told you that sodium intake and to some extent output does not affect serum sodium concentration. There's a reason for that. The reason amount of salt does not matter the amount of salt you eat. The reason it will not affect your serum sodium is because of this thing called aldosterone escape. So it turns out that the kidneys do in fact become refractory to the sodium retaining effect of aldo over time. So if somebody has, say, Cone syndrome, and they have an adenoma that is putting out aldosterone indiscriminately, yes, for the first few weeks, maybe months, the sodium will be retained by the kidneys. But remember, it's a question of time, right? Over time, what will happen? The intravascular volume will expand, right? And what will happen? Then the atrium will get stretched. And then what will they do? They will turn out A and P, right? And A and P, atrial natriuretic peptide, will go straight to the kidneys and start fighting for the kidneys to let go of some sodium. And that is one of the mechanisms by which this aldosterone escape, phenomenon takes place, right? Okay. So the other portion of it is what is called the tubulo-glomerular feedback. This feedback induces a decrease in distal sodium delivery and reabsorption in response to high renal perfusion pressure. So whenever the GFR is excessive, this feedback, the glomerular-tubular feedback, modulates the reabsorption of sodium, again to let go of some sodium. Because remember, when the intravascular volume is expanded, that means the kidneys will suffer increased blood flow, so there will be renal hyperperfusion, and that damages the kidneys. So the kidneys will protect themselves by minimizing sodium reabsorption further down, to make sure that the pressure comes down so to protect itself. You got that? Okay. It's called aldosterone escape mechanism. I don't think anybody would ever ask you about it, but it helps you understand why patients with Cone syndrome don't continue rising in blood pressure. Cone syndrome gives you hypertension. The blood pressure only rises to a level and it stops. Why does it stop? Even though the aldo is still there. The reason it stops rising and it just stays high and stays the same high is because the kidneys have a way of escaping from the aldosterone influence. Okay, that is rooted in the glomerulotubular balance, and the AMP. You got that? Excellent. Again, whenever you see increased sodium, almost always that reflects free water deficit. Anytime you see increased serum sodium, your patient has free water deficit. Okay? Free water deficit means pure water deficit. That means the patient needs water. Free water. And what is the best form of free water in clinical practice? Free water is, no, saline is not free
just
water.
drink water.
Yeah. What is it? Do you infuse water in the hospital? What do we infuse when we do free water? Free water is water that is available to the body, to all of the body. Normal saline is not available to all of the body because normal saline is sodium. When you give it, it stays in only in the extracellular space. D5. D5. Why is D5 free water even though it has sugar in it? Because it's 5 grams of glucose for 100 cc. That's like a candy bar. The body metabolizes it like that. And what's left is the free water. And that free water distributes freely. That's why it's called free water. Okay. The water in saline is not free water because it's still restricted. Okay. If you give albumin, the water in albumin is not free water because it's restricted to the intravascular space. It's not free. In order for you to give free water, that is water that is free from the time it enters the vein and can go inside the cell, is so free because it has nothing attached to it. Right? So whenever you see increase in serum sodium called hypernatremia, it signifies all the time free water deficit. You as a clinician, you now have the responsibility to compute how much free water deficit is there. And the way you compute that, because the human body is 60% water, so you do 0.6 times the patient's weight, and then you multiply that by the ratio of decrease in serum sodium or increase in serum sodium. So say for instance a patient is 60 kg and the serum sodium is 154, their deficit will be 0.6 times 60 times 154 over 40 minus 1. That is the rate by which sodium is down. That gives you 3.6 liters. And once you compute that, you replace 50% in 12 hours and the remainder over the next 12 hours. Why don't you want to correct serum sodium too quickly?
Right. Demyelination.
Yeah, what is it called? Thank you, CPM. Central pointing myelinolysis. Okay, that's why you have to do it 50% over 12 hours and then the remaining 50% over the next 12 hours. Okay? Excellent, you're good. Now let's go. So, how then do you approach a patient with hypernatremia? You know hypernatremia simply means either water deficit or salt gain, right? So it's not every hypernatremia that you go and start wasting your time computing free water deficit and all that stuff. You do the simple things first, and I help you here. Everything we talked about that causes free water loss, you can put in this thing called renals, right? So you look for renal failure. Is the patient recovering from renal failure? That is the reason the serum sodium is high, right? Is a patient having excessive insensible loss? So is this somebody that was found down by granddaughter who just came to visit from Florida because she hasn't heard from mom in 3 days and found mom unconscious? Of course, if serum sodium is high, it's because she's been down and not drinking and breathing. You know, so you look for diarrhea. Is the patient having diarrhea? You have the answer right there, right? So if you look for diuresis, is your patient polydipsic and polyuric? And do they have diabetes? So this, you know, there are some mnemonics I want you to hold on to, and you probably will be the only one with it because this one I came up with. You know, you don't need to do any workup. Just look for these riddles. Once you can identify the riddles, treat the hypernatremia. Don't worry anymore about it. Low fluid intake. Who suffers low fluid intake? The elderly and people that are unconscious, right? And then exercise or seizure, right? So all you have to kind of take a look at this. this is an algorithm to help you decipher this list. So you have somebody with hyponatremia. What do? Check their volume status, right? Check their volume status. So if their volume status is normal, just give them the saline. If the volume status is normal, that is, the patient is not hypovolemic, that means the free water deficit is coming from administration of hypertonic saline. Then you discontinue that. Like, for instance, a good place. Give me one example where somebody could get into this kind of situation. Remember mannitol? Where do we use mannitol? Exactly, intracranial hypertension, right? And the purpose is to drop water out of the brain to minimize the intracranial pressure. Where you think it stops there, no, it doesn't. It gets filtered, right? And it takes water out with it, right? So in somebody that is getting mannitol for intracranial hypertension, you're likely to experience hypernatremia, right? So in that case, you just discontinue or reduce the rate of the mannitol before you damage the brain, right? Now, where the problem is when your patient is hypovolemic. So you have somebody who is hyponatremic and hypovolemic at the same time. In other words, there is so much free water deficit, the intravascular space is threatened. The next thing you want to do in that case is to check the urine. Check for urine osmolality, right? Because what do you expect? In a patient with hyponatremia, you expect the urine to be concentrated, right? If somebody has free water deficit, the kidneys should be holding on to every ounce of water. If your patient is not concentrating urine like they should, something is wrong. That means that something in that urine is responsible for the water loss, right? That means the kidney is not free to reabsorb the water. Something in the urine is fighting the kidney's ability to reabsorb the water. Because under normal circumstances, hyponatremia means free water deficit. The kidneys should be concentrating urine. If the kidney is not concentrating urine, it's not acting right. Okay? That is why once you realize that the patient is not concentrating urine, then you look at the urine osmolality and see what is there. If you have urinary solid excretion more than 750, that means you have something in the urine that is causing the problem. If not, you have diabetes insipidus. Did you follow that? Are you going to go over it again? You followed it?
Go back to where you were right here for urinary solid excretion greater than 750.
Okay, so somebody is hypovolemic. You look for the minimal volume of maximally concentrated urine, right? So you look for a concentrated urine. If the urine is concentrated, that means the kidneys are fine.
Yeah.
In other words, the free water loss has nothing to do with the kidneys. It means the patient is losing water some other way. It could be diarrhea. It could be because they just had surgery and they have NG tube placed. And when they have NG tube, they're connected to the back. So they're sucking out gastric juice. And you can suck out liters of those a day. And patients can become volume depleted. And the kidneys will be rallying and struggling to concentrate urine to save water. And that will reflect in that concentrated urine. But if somebody is hyponatremic and the urine is not concentrated, then something is wrong with the kidneys. Right? Right? If they're hyponatremic and the urine is not concentrated, something is wrong with the kidneys. Then you now ask yourself, what is wrong? Is the kidneys losing water? Or is there something in the urine fighting the ability of the kidney to hold on to water? That is why you now measure the osmol in the urine. If you have high osmolality of the in the urine, that means there is something in the urine fighting the ability of the kidneys to retain water. Okay? So that's why this one is called osmotic diuresis. If not, that means the patient is drinking too much water. Okay? So that is what this scheme is. This is just a list to run through in your mind whenever you see hypernatremia by the bedside. Okay? Believe me, by the bedside, you're going to need all kind of mnemonics to remember stuff. And you should write, that is the thing you want to carry in your flashcard. You'll find out that over time, the problem is remembering which mnemonic goes with what. Okay? And that comes with practice. All right? Are you with me now? All right, let's go. Good. So let's do a few more questions. Did you see this one before? Now you know my secret, right? So you see, you say, which of the, I wish I didn't tell you that until now. Which of the following condition is likely to contribute to hyponatremia in an elderly patient found unconscious at home by his neighbors? High fever, insensibleness, lack of fluid intake, right? So it's all of the above, right? And then this one. What is the most likely diagnosis in this 48-year-old male with a 2-week history of excessive thirst and urination? Physical examination is unremarkable. Temperature is 100 Fahrenheit. It's hypotensive and tachycardic. And this is the metabolic profile. Now the question is, what is going on here? This is hyponatremia, right? Is it diabetes insipidus?
No.
Why not? Why did you say it's not diabetes insipidus? Because if it was diabetes insipidus, the BUN creatinine would be dilute. It will be less than 20. Most of the time less than 10. Have you heard about BUN creatinine ratios? Okay, yeah, it will be usually less than 10. Normal. When somebody is dry and dehydrated, it's more than 20. Right? So you look over here, you see the BUN creatinine, this person is really dry. So that means it cannot be diabetes insipidus. Because in diabetes insipidus, the person is drinking a lot of water. Urine tends to be dilute. Right? Is it psychogenic polydipsia? Well, it's not, because that will present just like diabetes insipidus, right? They are drinking too much water. Is it diabetes mellitus? Yes, look at the blood sugar. Right? So it's diabetes mellitus. Is it adrenal insufficiency? It can be. Look at the potassium. Where do you expect the potassium in adrenal insufficiency? No. In adrenal insufficiency, you expect potassium to be exactly, because remember, aldosterone exchanges sodium for potassium. So when it's not there, sodium is wasted, potassium is retained. Right? So because the potassium is low, it cannot be adrenal insufficiency. And it cannot be solid diuresis, because we're not told the patient was consuming any amount of solid. You got that? All right, moving on. So polyuria is defined as an hourly urinary output in excess of 125 mils. Which of the following condition is not a cause of polyuria? Diabetes mellitus will give you polyuria, right? Insipidus will do. High protein diet will do. How will you do it? False diuresis because of high solid production, primarily uric acid, right, and urea, right? Alcohol binge? Yes, you will. So aldosterone excess will never give you polyuria, right? Because it retains sodium. This is the way the question the exam is going to come. Are you comfortable with this?
Yeah.
Right? And this is the way I want you to study. This is the kind of questions I want you to engage. It challenges your understanding, the depth of your understanding of the entire concept. The beautiful thing about medicine, clinical medicine, is that everything relates. It's like the cosmos. Everything affects everything. You pull one string there, the whole thing will unravel if you don't know what you're doing. How about this one? What is the most likely cause of hyponatremia in this 28-year-old known malingerer with a 2-week history of loose, frequent stools? Physical examination is basically unremarkable, and this is the metabolic profile. Urine osmolality is 750. Usually it's about 500, right? So it's kind of high, right? Good. I should put in bracket normal 500, so you'll be with it next time. So, could this be malabsorption?
No.
Why not? If it was malabsorption, even though it's 2 weeks, 2 weeks is too short, I should make it like 6 weeks, right? If it's malabsorption, would the albumin be normal? No, in malabsorption, you're losing protein, right? And so, how will not be normal? Could it be insensible loss? It could be insensible loss because BUN creatinine is kind of high, right? But the patient was not unconscious. Why won't he drink? He was not febrile, he was not sweating. The history does not suggest that. Osmotic diuresis. Will osmotic diuresis give you loose frequent stool? You will pee out, right? Acute tubular necrosis, BUN creatinine is creatinine is normal. Right? So you see the answer is likely to be. The clue is the guy is a malingering. Right? So he doesn't want to go to work. Or something. And you see this in practice for you. He said, which of the following is not a persistent cause of hyperlipidemia? What is it? IV fluids, right? IV fluids. Remember I told you sodium intake does not increase your serum sodium. You will never get hypernatremia because you were eating too much salt or somebody gave you normal saline too much. No, you don't get hypernatremia from sodium intake. You don't. Your sodium content increases, but the plasma concentration is maintained. Okay, you understand the difference between content and concentration, right? Good.
Can you explain for this status epilepticus?
Status epilepticus?
Like what is how?
Like status epilepticus is when you have two seizures back to back, right? Are you asking me how?
Yeah, how does it connect to this? That's what I'm
Oh, I see. No. Just because status epilepticus is a cause of water shift, right? And we're talking hypernatremia. If you look in the list of the things that can shift water, exercise and seizures are one of them, right? Yeah. And about this one, what is the estimated free water deficit in this 58-year-old male alcoholic placed on food restriction 5 days ago for beer hypothermia? He got so scared, he refused to drink water. He came back for follow-up now with this profile. Compute that, you'll find out it's 3 liters, right? Because 0.6 times 72 is about 43. And then if you add the, whatever, 150 over 140 is about minus 1, I don't know, whatever, 0 point something. But if you compute it, you see it's about 3 liters, right? Are we good? Excellent. So I have 10 more minutes before 12. And then I'll see what I can do with it. But you're good, right?
Yeah.
Are you tired?
No,
You're
cool.
okay, good. Excellent. Let's do potassium. Because potassium is fun and it's kind of short. So potassium homeostasis, all of you, regardless what you eat, all humans, on the average, wherever they are, they take in about 100 milliequivalent of potassium every day. In food, in salts, if you go out of your way to eat banana for lunch, dinner, and breakfast, you consume more. But on the average, regardless what you eat, about 100 milliequivalent per day. And you put it inside the intestine, right? And from the intestine, it is absorbed. Once it is absorbed, it moves directly through the blood into the intracellular space, right? So ISF here, because this guy is British, right? I don't put this stuff together. I like the table so much, like, so I kind of interpreted it here. So extracellular space, fluid, and intercellular space. So you see that 98% of potassium in the body is inside the cells, but that amount is in equilibrium with the extracellular space fluid, right? Because there are pumps that keep taking potassium back into the cell, clearing it from the extracellular space. What is important that you want to remember is 10% of your potassium intake you pass out in stool. And much of it is in the kidneys. It's through the kidneys. Now you see why hyperkalemia is a problem in chronic renal failure. Because 90% of potassium excretion is through the kidneys. And when people are on dialysis, listen carefully, when people are on dialysis, because the kidneys are not working anymore, the percentage of potassium that is excreted in the colon is no longer 10%, it becomes 40%. Right? because the kidney is not working. Now the colon is trying to make up. So instead of secreting 10 for every 100, it's now 40. That is the reason constipation in end-stage renal disease patient is a cause for hyperkalemia. Because they lose that colonic compensation for their renal failure. You got that? Excellent, excellent. And you realize that that urine excretion of potassium is under the influence of aldo, potassium, sodium delivery, urine flow, and kidney injuries. Right? You got that? Plasma level increases, excretion increases. Sodium delivery will, aldosterone will try to claim sodium at the expense of potassium all the time. So if you increase the sodium delivery, you will increase potassium secretion, right? Okay, excellent. So now, let's talk about that renal potassium secretion, because remember, when I was talking to you about aldo, I told you that one of the ways in which we know how effective aldosterone is on the kidneys in terms of mediating potassium secretion is by computing the TTKG, transtubular potassium gradient. Remember that? Good. The reason that is important for you to know, and this is a very just information purpose only, you don't need to remember anything here. No, you don't need to know anything here, just remember it. Okay? So, the renal potassium secretion is an entirely passive process. It's a very passive process. It is modifiable by charge difference across the luminal membrane. So let me give you an example. If you have metabolic alkalosis, that means you have a lot of bicarb, right? In the filtrate. That's a negatively charged anion, right? It will attract potassium out. So in the presence of metabolic alkalosis, the renal potassium secretion will increase because of the bicarb, right? In somebody with Liddle syndrome, where the membrane is crazily permeable to sodium, and for every sodium he takes, he has to expel 1 potassium. So you will see that something like Liddle syndrome will increase renal potassium secretion. And then the potassium gradient across the renal tubule. You know the way the renal tubules take potassium, right? Imagine this is a renal tubule, right there. This table is a renal tubule. And this is the blood vessel, the circulation. And that there is the renal tubule, the inside of the lumen, right? Mm-hmm. How much potassium this goes from within these tubular cells into the urine depends on what the potassium gradient is between the tubular cells and serum, and between the tubular lumen and the tubular cells. Because what the tubular cells do is to grab potassium from the blood, put it into themselves, and then step over and take it from within themselves and dump it in urine. Right? So, if I have a high intraluminal potassium because of increased flow, like you get in polyuric ATN and diuretic therapy, I will dump more potassium in the urine because of the high flow. Right? Are you with me?
Yeah.
And if for any reason aldosterone comes and increases the intratubular cells potassium concentration, the gradient will be steeper for dumping it in the urine, right? This is so important because if you understand this and you're mathematically inclined, you will understand this equation. But you don't have to understand that equation. If you understand everything I said here, you will figure this out magically. You can break this down into the components of what I just put here. Okay, but I'm not going to bother you with that. You've seen this information before. I gave it to you in our adrenal insufficiency class. You need to know that there is something called transtubular potassium gradient, If it is less than 2, in somebody with hypokalemia, that person is losing potassium somewhere else. Okay? Normal transtubular potassium gradients means the kidneys are doing what they're supposed to do. Okay? If it is less than 2%, that means your patient is losing potassium elsewhere. If transtubular potassium gradient is more than 4 in somebody with hypokalemia, your kidneys are wasting your potassium. Are you with me? In the presence of hyperkalemia, you expect transtubular potassium gradient to be high or low? I'm asking the class. In the presence of hyperkalemia, do you expect the transtubular potassium gradient to be high or low? To be high, right? Because the secretion should increase with hyperkalemia. If you understand that potassium gradient across the tubules will facilitate the secretion, right? So if you have hyperkalemia, you should dump more, right? That is why potassium gradient less than 6 in the presence of hyperkalemia is strongly suggestive of aldosterone deficiency. Okay? And if it is more than 10 in somebody with hyperkalemia, the patient is taking too much potassium in. And people do. I've seen some of my kidney patients, they will be drinking oranges and eating banana and eating tomato. I'm like, you're going to kill yourself. Because these are potassium-rich food. You have kidney problem. The kidney secretes potassium passively. It's an entirely passive process. No, it's not an active process. So if you stack the odds against it, it will fail because it's a passive process. Okay, so that is just for information. We'll use it later on, but let's talk about hypokalemia. So hypokalemia is low serum potassium concentration. It could be false or true, right? When it is false, it is usually due to increased number of white cells, right? So you know that we draw blood, right, for potassium. And in the blood we draw there are white cells and red blood cells, and they are constantly taking in potassium. If in the lab, like we do in the research lab here, you draw the blood and you spin it down immediately and separated the serum, you won't have this problem. But if you sit it on the countertop like we do in most clinics and wait for the courier to come in the evening to come and take it to the lab to be run, depending on whether it's a Monday or a Friday, your serum potassium will be low and low and low because of the in vitro potassium uptake by the blood cells. Okay. So it could be false depending on the circumstances of the blood draw and how long it took for it to get to the lab and be analyzed. Right? Now, when it is true, again, like I told you, for your electrolytes, always think about shifts, intake, and output. So if it is a true hypokalemia, it could be due to intracellular shift, or reduced intake, or increased output. So what are the things that will shift potassium from outside into the cell? Metabolic alkalosis. Because in metabolic alkalosis, the body cells, they expel hydrogen ion to combat the alkalosis. And in order for them to remain electrically neutral, they take in potassium. So metabolic alkalosis will shift potassium into the cells, right? You know how beta agonists do it, right? The updraft, your Ventolin, your albuterol, and all this other stuff, right? Alpha agonists, again, through the sympathetic. Insulin excess, remember that, right? Hypomagnesemia, anabolic states, like you put somebody with megaloblastic anemia on folic acid, where you're going to stimulate red cell formation, right? And that requires potassium because potassium is the main intracellular cation. When you're forming new cells, you need more potassium, right? Rapidly growing tumors. All of these will shift potassium into the cell, and they are all causes of hypokalemia by intracellular shift. Now, reduce intake. Most people will consume enough potassium in their diet, but there are some meat eaters that don't eat fruit at all, right? And they can have that. In some southeastern part of the United States, people eat clay. I know we eat clay in some part of Africa, but I didn't know that in some southeastern United States they do eat white clay, right? It's like chalk, but it's edible, right? It turns out that white clay actually binds potassium in the gut. So you might chew it and it tastes good in your mouth, but the truth is, if you're drinking orange and you're chewing white clay, the potassium in your orange is not going to be absorbed because the white clay is going to bind it and keep it in the gut until you excrete it, right? So that's important for you guys to know. Increased output. Well, where could you lose potassium? In diarrhea. Increased output could come from the kidneys or from the GI tract or from dialysis. So diarrhea and enterocutaneous fistula. You all know what enterocutaneous fistula is, right? Good. Excellent. All right. And then in the kidneys, well, primary hyperaldo, volume depletion, polyuric phase of ATN, congenital tubular defects, right? You remember the congenital tubular defects that can cause hypokalemia? Bartter syndrome, and which other one? Guilderman. You can't forget those. Because Guilderman is like somebody is on thiazide diuretics, and Bartter's is like somebody is on loop diuretics. They are both congenital tubular defects. Bartter's is in the loop of Henle. Guilderman is in the distal convoluted tube. They cause hypokalemia and they cause hypotension because it behaves as if the patient is on diuretic. Unlike the opposite of Liddle syndrome. Liddle syndrome causes hypokalemia because they have love for sodium at the expense of potassium, but Liddle syndrome causes high blood pressure. Popular questions in internal medicine questions, and one day I'm sure those questions will make it into your hands. You know, they like to talk about Liddles, Bartter's, and Guilderman, depending on what they do, because they both cause hypokalemia. All of them cause hypokalemia, but Liddles causes hypertension. Bartter's and Guilderman cause hypotension. And then dialysis, of course, you know. And then there are drugs that increase potassium secretion. Extended spectrum penicillins like piperacillin will increase potassium excretion. All right, so how does hypokalemia present? Look, it presents like this: fatigue, confusion, irritability, numbness, muscle cramps, muscle weakness, paralytic ileus. You know what paralytic ileus is, right?
Yeah.
Good. That gives you bloating and indigestion. It presents with arrhythmia and EKG. All of this is so non-specific. Everybody will expect you to know about the EKG manifestation. This is what a normal EKG looks like. You see how well-rounded the T wave is and almost how invisible the U wave is. When you have hypokalemia, you get ST segment depression. The T wave becomes short and then the U wave becomes prominent. Okay? So that's what you look for in hypokalemia. Now, there is something called hypokalemic periodic paralysis. Hypokalemic periodic paralysis is a very rare disorder, but scary, because the patient presents with complete flaccid paralysis. The patient wakes up, they are awake, but they can't move a single muscle in their body. Frightening experience. It is due to sympathetic nervous system mediated massive potassium shift from outside to the inside of the cell. The patient presents with massive complete paralysis, and the only thing they have is that potassium will be like in single digits, 1, 0.8 when you draw the blood. But everybody knows when you see it, because the patient is awake and they are completely paralyzed. Nothing does that. If a stroke will paralyze you completely, you will be unconscious. So the only way you'll be conscious and talking to me and not able to move a single muscle in your body, Now, not many things that can give that. It's called hypokalemic electrolysis. Again, the potassium mutation, potassium channel mutation. It can be precipitated by exercise, certain food. 50% of the patient who have migraine is an inability to move muscles or limb or weakness. Most of the time, it's a massive thing. Okay, onset of symptoms is usually in adolescent, and this is I think you need to know that. So, how do you generally evaluate hypokalemia? Well, the way you evaluate hypokalemia is, first of all, you decide, is it true or false? Lab called you on Sunday night. Oh, your patient, you need to get hold of John Doe because his potassium is 1.8. And you remember seeing John Doe on Friday, and he went home. If his potassium is 1.8, would he go home? No, he wouldn't. He said, okay, fine, thank you for the info. No, that was sweet. So the courier probably picked up the sample that Monday morning, right? After he'd been sitting in the fridge or overnight. So you have to decide, is it true or false? Curious. If it is true, the next thing you want to ask yourself is quickly, you want to go through the list of the things that will shift potassium. Metabolic alkalosis, alpha blocker, beta agonist, insulin. Did the patient get updraft treatment? Or was it just in the hospital, in the emergency room where he went for COPD exacerbation and they put him on all these updrafts and then draw his blood, but he got so better before he left? They discharged him, and then the lab is now reporting the sample that was drawn when he was on updraft. Of course, it will be low, right? So you quickly go through your list of things that will shift potassium. If you can find them, then you're good. If you cannot find a shift, now you have a problem. You now have to decide, is this potassium low because the patient is not taking it enough, or the patient is losing it? Then you now check for urine potassium. If urine potassium is low, that means the kidneys are doing everything they can to respond to the hypokalemia. Therefore, the potassium will be getting lost somewhere else. Okay? If urine potassium is high, then the kidney is where your potassium is being lost. Right? Then you now look at serum bicarbonate. If your bicarbonate is low, in other words, you have acidosis with the hypokalemia, that is the perfect presentation of renal tubular acidosis. Okay? But you can also see it in diabetic ketoacidosis. But the truth is, in diabetic ketoacidosis, it's obvious. Right? So most of the time when your patient is quiet and everything is going on in the clinic, and you see through hypokalemia with increased urine potassium with acidosis, that is almost always renal tubular acidosis. If your serum bicarb is high, if your serum bicarbonate is high, what is it that gives you metabolic alkalosis and hypokalemia? Aldosterone excess. Remember that? Right? So how do you decipher that? You check the blood pressure. If blood pressure is high, then you're dealing with Liddle syndrome, Cushing syndrome, or hyperaldo. If blood pressure is low, then you're dealing with diuretics, vomiting, Barthel's, Gilman, or magnesium deficiency. You see, this figure is generally what I use to set questions. Because it's a very boring figure. Okay? Even though if you understand everything I've just talked about, it's a good summary of it. But if you didn't understand everything I talked about, it could be very boring. Right? So why am I telling you this? This is something you can pair yourself up and write questions for yourself. Quiz yourself, time and again. Paint a picture of a patient with hypokalemia and if there's something going on that is shifting the potassium, and ask yourself. Because what you really want to do is to understand how this works. You will never be able to commit this to memory. It doesn't work like that. This is a scheme. The only way you remember it is by deploying it. So you have to kind of create, you can even on your own, spend 1 hour and write all kind of questions based on this for yourself, and then close this, come back a week later and try to answer those questions. That way you will not be able to memorize this table, but you can deploy it effectively with practice. Okay? Again, on the side here, I reminded you what Little syndrome is, what Bartter syndrome is, and what Gilman is. Okay, how do you treat hypokalemia? Well, you treat hypokalemia, first you assess for life-threatening complications. You see somebody with true hypokalemia, you want to take a look at the patient, not the patient. If there is anything life-threatening, you don't care what is causing it. You treat them, you give them potassium. Usually about 10 minute equivalent KCl, IV, over 15 to 20 minutes, slowly. Because why do you have to give it slowly? Because remember, you're giving potassium, but potassium, and you can only give it into the serum, into plasma. But potassium does not belong in plasma. It belongs inside the cells. So you have to give it slowly to allow the body to move it over. If you push it too fast, you move the patient from hypokalemia to hyperkalemia, and the hearts hate that. The heart will freak out on you with some crazy arrhythmia, and your patient will pass out, and you'll be like, oh, what did you do? And you know what happens? When emergency happens, while you're right there with the needle, everything in your hand, everybody looks at you, what did you do? So you check for life-threatening situations, and if there isn't any, then you now go and say, okay, let's take a look at this. You assess the potassium deficit, and they give you a formula here. You can remember it if you want, but I don't think you need it, right? You're going to replace potassium. And what you're going to need to do, for all hypokalemia, you're going to replace potassium. What difference is how do you choose to replace it? Are you going to replace it by mouth or by injection? Right. And this right here is just like a way of telling you how to choose your preparation and how to give it. Should you give potassium chloride? Yes, that's what you should give in everybody. But if somebody is in DKA, because what other risk do you run when you're treating DKA? Hypophosphatemia. How does hypophosphatemia present? You know what happens in hypophosphatemia? You know what it does to the body? You know ATP, ADP reaction? In order for you to convert ADP to ATP, you need ADP and inorganic phosphate. And that reaction is the currency in which the body cells do transaction in energy. The body saves energy by converting ADP to ATP. It gets energy by converting ATP to ADP. And inorganic phosphate is crucial in that reaction. So when you have hypophosphatemia, body cells cannot deal with energy. It's like they're broke. They can't spend, they can't get energy. And the dreadful manifestation is massive intravascular hemolysis, because the red cells are not able to maintain their membrane integrity. They begin to pop all over, and your patient is bleeding within the blood vessels. Their urine turns red and dark immediately. Heart rate is going up like crazy. They flood the serum with potassium that they contain, and you got trouble. You have to dialysis, IV, lasers, everything you throw at the patient. So hypophosphatemia is nothing you want to risk. That is why in DKA we give potassium phosphate, not potassium chloride. You got that? And then potassium carbonate if there is a coexisting renal tubular acidosis, right? So you see, so this is a very good diagram if you understand how to read it. Okay? I'm going to go through these questions and I'll stop. And then I'll finish the hypokalemia in the next lecture. Okay, so let's see this. Which of the following clinical condition is likely to be associated with an intracellular shift of potassium? You all know that, right?
Yeah.
We talked about this a lot, right? 68-year-old male hypertensive diabetic present with 2-week history of progressive shortness of breath associated with tubular apnea and swelling of both legs. Physical examination is consistent with CHF. This is the admission profile. The question is, why is the potassium normal? If you understood my slide on renal potassium secretion as a passive process, you will know why this is the answer. Aldosterone-mediated renal potassium secretion in edematous patients requires tubular flow. So most of the time, your patient with CHF will not come with hypokalemia. The reason they will not come with hypokalemia, even though they are depleted intravascularly, even they turn on aldo, the renal tubular flow of urine is so slow that the aldosterone does not have enough sodium in the cortical collecting tube to absorb in exchange for potassium. So they don't get hypokalemia until you give them diuretics. It is after you give them diuretics that the high aldo becomes active, because now with diuretics you're going to increase the distal delivery of sodium. So you're going to increase sodium delivery to the distal and the cortical collecting duct. And the aldo that they've had all this time that did not have enough sodium to reabsorb in exchange for potassium goes like, whoa, look at all this sodium, and you begin to blend them and dump the potassium at that time. So generally speaking, patients with CHF, they don't come through with hypokalemia. And thank God, because if they do, I imagine CHF with arrhythmias, that's all you need for them, right? So this is why that is the answer right there. Okay, now, which of the following causes of hypokalemia is likely to be associated with TTKG of less than 2% extrarenal loss? Okay? If you have hypokalemia and your TTKG is low, that means your kidneys are fine. You're losing the potassium somewhere else.
More than 4 is being.
Yeah. When it's more than 4, there is no reason for transtubular potassium gradient to be more than 4 in someone with hypokalemia. Why is this kidney dumping potassium when it's scarce in the body? Okay? What is the most likely reason for low potassium on the metabolic profile of this 8-year-old female on hospital admission for acute leukemia? Right? In vitro. Acute leukemia is marked by whopping increase in white count, right? So they will bump up the potassium in minutes. Okay? Which of the following is the most likely reason for normal serum potassium in patients with high sodium intake? So if somebody is taking in a lot of sodium, right, you expect them to filter that sodium through the kidneys, right? You expect them to have enough sodium in the collecting duct. And if aldo is present, aldosterone should try to claim the sodium at the expense of potassium, right? But why doesn't that happen? Can anybody tell me? Because by default, the increase in sodium intake turns off aldo. Right? That is why you don't become hyponatremic and hypokalemic because you're taking a lot of salt. Even though you'd expect that. If you're taking a lot of salt, you're going to deliver it in the cortical collecting duct, and aldosterone will claim it, and it will dump potassium. So you should be having a lot of cramps from eating too much salt. No, you wouldn't. Because the very fact that you're dumping so much sodium in your system is going to turn off the aldo. So you're not going to get that. So that's why that's the answer. Isotonine intake suppresses aldosterone level. I think that is that your answer. What is the end? I want to end, right? Well, you guys start throwing rocks at me. All right, so we just did this one. What is the most appropriate diagnosis in this 5-year-old male with persistent elevation in blood pressure? This is a 5-year-old with hypertension. Look at the metabolic profile. He has hypokalemia, metabolic alkalosis. What's the answer? Little syndrome. If I had told you that this kid passed out, maybe I made him 15 years old, and I tell you, keeps passing out on football field, and when you saw him, I give you positive orthostasis, right? What would the answer be? Goodman or Batters? I will have to get rid of one of them. You know, I can put Cone syndrome here, and then the answer will be Batters syndrome. Right? You got that? Good. So I want you to remember, Liddle syndrome, Batters, and Gilman syndrome, they all give you hypokalemia. They all give you metabolic alkalosis. The difference is Liddle's will give you hypertension, Batters and Goodman will give you hypertension. And what is the difference between Batters and Giddles is where the problem is in the tubules. In Batters, it's in the thick segment. In Gilman, it's in the distal convoluted tubule. Just remember thiazide and loop okay? In which of the following causes of potassium loss is urine chloride likely to be more accurate index of renal potassium excretion than urine potassium? Where here would you rely more on urine chloride than urine potassium? And why? Of course, you know it's gastric aspiration because that's like vomiting. And vomiting will give you metabolic alkalosis. Well, with metabolic alkalosis, you really cannot judge renal potassium handling by measuring urine potassium because the kidneys have nothing to do with it. The bicarb that is in excess in circulation is dragging the potassium out. So you can't use TTKG in this case. You understand what I'm saying? The question is, in which of the following is urine chloride likely to be more accurate index of renal potassium secretion when anything will give you metabolic alkalosis? And this is the only thing that will do it. Osmotic diarrhea will give you acidosis. That doesn't matter. Enteroperitoneal fistula will give you acidosis. It doesn't matter. But alkalosis, yes. Because the bicarb that is filtered will drag potassium with it. And that increase in urine potassium that you will see is not a true picture of the renal handling of potassium in the presence of metabolic alkalosis. You got that? Give me the last one. Let's mark this. High WBC, 0. Urine K less than 2. X-ray loss. TTKG more than 4 with hypokalemia. Insulin infusion, white clay, reduce intake, right? Good. Thank you. Thank you so much for your patience and endurance. Thank you.